Rabbi Matalon, who is the rabbi from Yeshurun here on the west side, and Dr. Erin Leib Smokler, who is the director of spiritual development at Yeshivat Maharat. Their longer bios are here on your programs, and I'll let them introduce themselves as well. They were asked to speak about sort of very personally, professionally, about the work that they do in the community. Each of them teaches and leads and helps form the spiritual lives of people in their respective communities. And we've asked them to speak about the place of holiness in contemporary Jewish life. The way the evening will work is Dr. Leib Smokler will speak first, and Dr. Matalon will speak, and then we'll get to eavesdrop as they converse with each other.
You just gave me a doctorate.
You just gave him a doctorate.
Oh, whatever. Rolando and Erins.
So not the rabbi.
Titles are just a bad thing in the Jewish world. Let's get rid of all the titles, guys.
Yeah, exactly.
Rabbis are important. Rabbis are important.
And then we'll be able to listen to them speak to each other, and then they'll be talking with you. So, Erin.
So I wanted to begin tonight by citing the famous directive of the Torah regarding holiness from Vayikra, the famous Vayidaber Hashem al Moshe lemor, daber el kol adat b'nei Yisrael ve'amarta aleihem kadoshim tihiyu ki kadosh ani Hashem Elokechem. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the whole Israelite community and say to them, you shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy." So I note that the language here regarding the human spiritual endeavor is necessarily aspirational, kadoshim tihiyu. And God, by contrast, symbolizes a holiness of status, a static, reliable, unconditional attribute. Ki kadosh ani Hashem Elokechem. Holiness is a definitional fact of God's existence, according to this source. The holiness of the Jewish people, however, is an altogether different project. It is just that. It is a project, a task of a lifetime, something that is ever essentially on the horizon of possibility, but never fully achieved. Indeed, the moment that one takes oneself to have achieved holiness is the very moment that it disappears. For holiness is essentially about reaching for transcendence, not arriving at a place of complacence. This is what Korach did not understand when he said in a different context, Kol ha'ida kulam kadoshim. The whole nation, everyone, is already holy. This is the spiritual error that cost him dearly. The self-satisfied attitude must literally be swallowed up by the earth because it threatens so deeply the path to authentic, a deeply humble spirituality. In the words of Yeshayahu Leibowitz, the brother of the more famous Nehemiah Leibowitz, the uniqueness of the Jewish people is not a fact, it is an endeavor. The holiness of Israel is not a reality, it is a task. So to what are we aspiring, and how do we enable the pursuit of this task in community? So as I mentioned, I've had the incredible privilege of being here for these past two sessions with Rabbi Dr. Tzvi Blanchard, who is here tonight, and Rabbi Dr. Ariel Mays, who is not. I'd like to meet Rabbi Doctor. Try that one next time. So I'd like to shape my brief remarks tonight in reference to theirs as a way of both framing tonight's conversation and also drawing this three-part series to a close. I won't do justice to either speaker, so forgive these skeletal distillations, but here's a taste for those of you who weren't here. During the first session 2 weeks ago, Rabbi Dr. Blanchard offered us a conceptual framework in which to think about what Kedusha is. As I understood it, he offered a kind of negative theology, that is a sense of what Kedusha is not. Even more importantly, he encouraged us to think about what it means to be Mekudash, or Mekadesh rather, to sanctify something. Rooting himself in God's own act of sanctifying the Shabbat, he argued that sanctifying is about the establishment of fences and limits, and hence Kedusha is a willingness to encounter limits, to back away, in order to make space for things that are otherwise not available. That sound good? Okay. Or only slightly differently put, Kedusha is the willingness to be open to discovering what happens when we make clearings in our lives. And what steps into that space? Maybe mystery, Shekhinah, or light. Nothing is predetermined, nothing contentful can really be said. He left us with a stirring image of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur. Once a year, one man clears his life for something uniquely powerful to occur, and we have no idea what happens there. Such is the life of Kedusha. We prepare ourselves by stripping ourselves of the clang and clutter that block contact with the divine. And then we enter into the unknown, ready to receive. But what it is, we're not always sure. Rabbi Dr. Mays moved us away from the language of space and clearings and what Kedusha is not, toward what Kedusha, or maybe more accurately, the life of Kedusha might actually be. He organized his presentation around areas of our lives that might serve as access points to holiness, according to the Hasidic tradition, namely time, space, deeds, midot, or character attributes, speech, and people. All of these areas help us experience otherworldliness in our world. Through intensifications of God contact in this place or in that time, a more diffuse holiness in all place and all time can be appreciated. We need to train our Kedusha muscles, so to speak, to actively cultivate awareness of transcendence if we are to encounter it as such. So using these two frames, holiness as moving away versus moving toward, or clearing away space versus mindfully filling in the gaps, I want to now turn to some questions of practice. How can we educate ourselves and others toward these avenues of quest? So I serve as Director of Spiritual Development at Yeshivat Maharad, which is a big title, but essentially means that I help to create the spiritual culture of a yeshiva. And so I think about these issues constantly. While I have yet to find the perfect algorithm for holiness, neither for myself nor for my students, here are some of the ways that I try to help my students quiet their lives and invite mystery, awareness, humility, awe, and God into it. I'll offer just some of the practices that we have, and if they're of interest, I'm happy to speak more about it as we speak amongst ourselves. Some areas of clearing, by which I mean ways that we try to open up the space and get rid of the din around us. Song, nigun, whether it's a daily practice around tefillah, afternoon jam sessions, which we have evenings, tishes dedicated to this. Song itself seems to act as just that, a clearing, a kind of vocalized silence. We like to think of it as a way of helping us move away from language, move away from all the categories that get in the way of experience and opening up our hearts. Prayer, I think, is in the same category. Interestingly, upon reflection, I thought about whether we see it as contentful holiness creation, I suppose, or whether it too is a clearing. And I think it's more of the latter. Sure, we use a siddur, but more than anything, it's a space and a time during the day where we move away from that intellectual rigor that we call Talmud Torah, and again, make space for something else to come in. Finally, we have what we call hashpa'ah, which are meetings together with our peers, with me, where we make space questions about where God is in our lives. It's a place to pause, to reflect on Kedusha, to foreground the spiritual aspect of our lives. Without adding in the content, it merely is a time and a space that we set aside just to take note of whether or not we are feeling alive to the reality of a presence around us. In terms of cultivations and what we put into the gaps, obviously we learn Torah. That's one thing that we can do to help focus our attention and awareness. My particular area is a kind of Torah study that we call pastoral Torah. It's a kind of Torah study that I think is well on display here in these sessions that Drisha sponsors, and I hope is happening here tonight as well, where we try to overlap text and life, to hear our lives echo against our tradition, to have our experiences echo against those of our ancestors. In so doing, we help to bring our past and our present into conversation. And we believe Kedusha enters in those interstices. We try to focus on our own midot through musar practices. We have a musar vad where we hold each other accountable to acts of, or to rather to inward reflection, taking upon ourselves particular midot, attributes that we're working on, and as a community we work on them. And the act of community building, of course, is part of that as well. Fellowship, spiritual fellowship amongst ourselves radiates outward, we believe, and again, helps to transform the communities that we are in. Chesed is also, of course, part of that, being of service to others, recognizing that when we step away from ourselves and into the lives and needs of others, there too, we can hear the emergence of some Kedusha. These are all, of course, just practices, but more than anything, they are attempts at a discipline. They're attempts to hone our spiritual sensibilities, to make space to hear silence, to make space to be receivers of presence. And in a world that so easily tramples our intimations of transcendence, we try to hear this aspirational call of Kadoshim Tihiyu, always future-oriented, never achieved. That's our beginning. Thank you.
Really pleasure to be here and to have a cooperation between BJ and Risha is very meaningful, very important to us. And when Laura called me to ask me about this session, I said, whatever you or David ask is yes. And then I'll think about how I'll do what I'm asked to do. It's not an easy one. So I'm really happy to be here. I wasn't here for the past couple of weeks, unfortunately, so I missed all the building up and the foundational work to this last session. But I spoke with her a little bit and she told me about her experience the last couple of weeks. So the question is there room for holiness in our lives, in our family life, in our work life, in our leisure time, in the way in which we frame our lives? So first, just a few moments about what I think is holiness and what is the holy. In my view, the holy is the space for the contact between the human and the divine. It's the place of encounter, it's the bridge between the human and the divine. And so the question is, in holiness, then how do we achieve a connection with the Creator? How do we achieve a connection with Kadosh Baruch Hu, who is holy, and we are not holy? So how do we achieve a connection, being unholy, with something or someone who is holy? So the first thing I believe is that we have to acknowledge that that the Creator placed us in a situation that where we have to wrestle. We are in a situation where we live in a physical world with a neshama, and we have to transcend the physical world in order to be able to see and to connect and to act from the place of the neshama. And we have to constantly struggle to see the inner side of things, the neshama part of things, rather than the external. But we live in a world of the senses, and we get constantly trapped in the outside, what we call the chitzoni, the outside. And we have to constantly struggle to move to the pnimiyut, to move to the inner place in ourselves and in the world. And that's one of the steps that we have to take in order to be able to connect with that which is holy and only with God. Second, we have to change, if you will, the language is a little difficult, the shape of our heart. We have to be able to change our heart so that we can connect with the divine, with Kadosh Baruch Hu, because in our natural, normal human state, our heart needs a lot of work in order to be able to acquire the shape in which it can connect with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In other words, we have to do work in our neshama so that we can acquire the state, the condition in which we can connect with the Holy One. Another thing is that we say and we know that God, the Creator, Kadosh Baruch Hu, is eternal. We say that God is Nitzchi, that God is eternal. So we have to be able to connect to things that are eternal, moments, to things, we have to connect to the eternal in our reality in order to be able to access HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to access God, to access the Creator of the world, because God is eternal. It is the eternal in reality. And so how do we transcend the trappings of space and time and move into situations in which we connect with something that is eternal? In other words, how do we take things of space and look at their inner aspect, at their pnimiut, and access the eternal through I'll give a few examples of how we try to do that. The same with time. How do we make moments? How do we make moments that are eternal? How do we connect the past, the present, and the future all at once in one moment, all at simultaneously, and then we access an experience of eternity, namely an experience of the Holy. I believe that just another couple of things, that what we call in our metaphoric language the upper world, it's not spatially up there, but what we call the reality, that is the upper reality, the upper world, has a certain structure, a certain map that our masters for generations and generations, beginning with our patriarchs and our prophets, Moshe Rabbeinu and our prophets and so on, have given us a sense of what that structure, that map of that upper world looks like. And we know that if we can mirror the reality in which we live to be a mirror of the reality in that upper world, according to the map that our teachers, prophets, mystics, rationalists, all the collective wisdom of the Jewish tradition that have mapped out what that divine upper world reality looks like, that if we can somehow structure our lives, structure our souls, and structure our lives according to that, then we can somehow connect with that upper reality. So that's some basic things of how I understand holiness and how we connect. So the first thing is, for me, now is, where do we live? We live, what's our reality? What's the culture in which we live? It's a culture of individualism. It's all about me. It's not about anything else but me. God has to serve me. Others have to serve me. The world has to serve me. It's about my needs. So we live in a culture of individualism, of greed, of self-gratification, of consumption, of vulgarity, of quick fixes, of instantaneity. Everything is now, in the, as I'm speaking here, my thing is ringing, and I know somebody's trying to get an answer from me now. We live in a culture where there's a utilitarian approach to relationships. We don't relate to people as we should, but we relate to people as to what people can give me, or how can I advance by using relationships, networking. So what's the spiritual work? The spiritual work is to be able to shift, to be able to go against the current of this culture in which we live, and try to transcend self-concern. God is, the holy is about, all about, there's no self-concern in God. Because God doesn't need, there's no self-concern in God. God is all about altruism, if you will. If we can model ourselves to that upper reality of altruism and transcend self-concern, therefore transcend individualism, transcend everything that is about me, then maybe we can connect. We can find that kesher. So how do we do it? We do it by putting ourselves in a situation of service and asking ourselves not what can I get, but what can I give? How can I serve? By examining the relationship, the way I relate. Do I relate out of self-interest? Do I relate out of what I need? Or do I relate out of love and out of wanting to give? I ask myself, how do we spend our time? It's not all about now, quick. But it's about how do we spend our time? How do we, in the midst of our lives, find moments in which we can actually tie past, present, and future and experience it in one moment? How do we spend our money? How do we consume? So all of these things, how do we make ourselves useful? All of these things actually are translated into the mitzvot that we do. So in the life of our community, I'm coming for a landing. How do we do it in the life of our community? We do it in the life of our community, number one, by trying to teach and to live our lives not only by looking at the exterior of things, but teaching ourselves, train ourselves to look at the interior of things. By learning Torah, you begin to learn how to look at the interior of things. If you learn a lot of Torah, hopefully, after a while, you understand that there's a deeper meaning to things, and not just to psukim. There's a deeper meaning to everything, and you begin to connect to the inner meaning of yourself, of the other, of the things that surround you in reality. So learning of Torah is a big training. So we believe that being part of a spiritual community, being part of a synagogue, is actually agreeing to be part of a fellowship of spiritual work. That we come to do spiritual work. We come not just to enjoy, and not just to relax, and not just to be served, but to do the work that will allow us, number one, to see the inner side of things, number two, to come out of ourselves and our own individualism and our own needs. So we do mitzvot for others. We do a lot of mitzvot ben adam lechavero, in the sense that we put ourselves and we encourage and we urge people to do the mitzvot of people cholim, on Nechumah Avelim, to console the mourners, to take care of the needs of Levayat Hamet, of going to funerals, of taking care of the needs of the body of the deceased, and so on and so forth. Chevra Kadisha. So this is the way in which, to have a multiplicity of opportunities for chesed, so that people can actually serve others in the community. And as you serve, you come out of your own, what I need for myself. You forget at some point what is that you need for yourself when you serve others. We stress the importance of Shabbat. Now, we're a liberal community, and people have a multiplicity of ways to connect to Shabbat. But we hope that people find ways to connect to Shabbat in which they can experience time in a different way, and in a different way than ordinary time, when everything is so split, when everything has to be right now. And the Shabbat opens up a different experience of time and has opportunities for us to touch some of that eternity, some of that taste of what eternal moments are about. Not the entire Shabbat, but moments here and there where you connect with something eternal, therefore with the holy. Prayer is a huge part also of our work, because prayer actually is, I believe, what really changes the heart. The goal of prayer, we call it prayer avodah shebalev, and it's really the work of the heart to actually change from a place of closeness, also from a place of self-interest to a place of connection, to a place of openness. So we try to somehow spell out, now we're trying to do it a little bit more than we used to spell out how the things that we do in the normal life of a community, prayer, learning of Torah, mitzvot adam lachavero, or even the way in which we, the awareness of the way in which we consume, especially with how we relate to food, how we relate to waste, how we relate to shopping, buying, and so on. To have an awareness that these things are not just an end in themselves, that mitzvot are not an end in themselves, but are actually to help us shape the way we live and the way we connect with that which is holy. The same about relationships and fellowship, and being in community is very much about how people relate to one another and how people are present for one another, how people support and learn from one another. So that's basically, in short, description of all the multiplicity of things that are done in a religious community such as ours, and how all of these are paths, actually, to connect us with that which is holy. So, I have a lot more things, but time is running out. I think we should have a conversation amongst two of us, and then we'll be happy to open it up and dialogue with you. So, I see that there are many aspects of your work and my work, although my work is not just my work, it's the work of an entire community. I'm the leader of an entire community trying to engage in this type of thing. That there's a lot that is similar, if not identical. You're doing it in an academic and a spiritual setting, and I'm doing it in a community. I'm interested, so you mentioned song and nigun and prayer and learning Torah and mitzvot and musar, community building, fellowship, chesed. And I want to hear a little bit more about what you call hashpa'ah.
So hashpa'ah is something that we are learning, frankly, from the more liberal communities. Hashpa'ah is something, hashpa'ah ruchani, the extended title, I suppose. And that's a term that itself is borrowed from Christian community of spiritual direction. And so we have been privileged to be the beneficiaries of direction from Aleph, the Alliance for something.
Jewish Renewal.
For Jewish Renewal, thank you. Which has helped to offer me some guidance in how to create spiritual spaces between people, with the guidance of one individual. It essentially is a kind of spiritual therapy, which means that we're not solving anyone's emotional problems, but we are foregrounding that which is spiritual. What are the barriers to spiritual life? Where are the ways, where are the places that one actually experiences holiness? For me personally, and I'm not speaking for any theory of spiritual direction now, I think that there is a great utility in just naming those moments in our lives that just feel subjectively holy. And that happens for us one-on-one and also in a group. So in small groups, we also find that just hearing from other people where they can locate transcendence, where they feel presence, helps to expand our own sense of where that might be. So I didn't necessarily think that tending to my son at 4 o'clock in the morning was holy, but it turns out it can be. And I didn't necessarily think about the rapid race out there actually as having sparks of holiness, but someone else does, and that gives me a different kind of ear to hear with. So a lot of the work is the clearing, is just having the space and the time to identify and think about where God is or is not. That's also equally important, just to be aware, particularly in a yeshiva, which is ostensibly doing the work of spiritual development and leadership building, to really pay attention to the ways in which that is not always a holy endeavor. Not because it's unholy, but because we're not paying attention. So just having those times in the week to think about it is really quite crucial, and really redounds beyond the meetings themselves to create a kind of spiritual fellowship, as we said.
Yeah.
So that's the way it's working for us.
It's wonderful.
So can ask you.
Yeah.
So I would just say that something that I thought was very useful in your framing was the identification of holiness as really profoundly countercultural. And Deborah had sort of set the task moments ago, and I'm not sure I did it, maybe you can do it, to think out loud about how we actually can bring holiness or awareness of holiness into the lives of those who are tone deaf. Thank you. Tone deaf, totally unaware of anything other than what is cultural. How do you actually do that?
I think it's, by the way, I think it's countercultural, but I think it's also unnatural in the sense, if our culture is particularly pushing in that direction, against holiness in particular, but I think that even not in our present culture, that human beings left to their own devices have a tendency, most of us have a tendency to squander our time, to be selfish, to not pay attention. I think that human beings left to their own devices by nature, fall into laziness. We fall into all sorts of, we don't make the effort. We don't go the extra mile. We don't surpass. We don't work. I believe that to a great extent, the Torah and the mitzvot, present to us a life of work and awareness and of transcending and of struggling. I think that religious life is a life of struggle. I don't buy into the notion that religious life is a life of quietism and peace. I mean, you may get there, but through a lot of work. And the forces that tear us away from that which is holy, the natural human forces, plus the cultural forces, are very, very powerful. So how do you work with people who may be tone deaf to these things? Well, I can tell you that, our community is a very big community. I realize, and there are many people here who are members of PJ, and the people who are here who are members of PJ happen to be people who are part of the core of this community, people who are, who participate often, who study, who pray often, who are part of the core. But there's lots of other people who come to this community for all sorts of other reasons. They're good people, they're hardworking people. They're not tuned in to the fact, the ideal or the aspiration is that people need to work hard spiritually. It's people who go to work and go home and they read books and they go on vacation and they watch TV and they travel to Israel and they travel to other places. I mean, just normal lives. People who are workaholic, people who are not workaholic. Those people are not close enough to the core, to the center of our community to be able to receive the message. They're not frequent enough and not close enough to be able to absorb and to be in the orbit, of this work. And it's very difficult. And at times I confess in public, I've asked myself, did we go too far? Did we go too far with the size of the community? It's always wonderful. People join and join and join and join, and services get larger and larger and larger. And besides, the ego trip, there's a sense of great validation. Say, well, people coming here, Baruch Hashem, keep coming. We'll never close the door to people who want to come and absorb some form of spirituality and be part of a Jewish community and be close to Torah. That's great. On the other hand, you know what happens from Friday night to the next Friday night with those people? It's a question mark. You know, are they within the orbit of this, putting themselves in this spiritual work? And I have to say, I want to work with the people who want to do the work. That's whom I devoted to. And the people who are not part of that circle, I would love to bring them in, but you know, my commitment is to the people who want to do the work, for the people who say, I want to unplug my ears, to the people who say, I want to hear, even though I'm tone deaf, I want to learn, I want to come, but there's a bunch of other people who are not, and it's very difficult because these people also have to be served, and they have to be attended to, and they're human beings, and they're Jews, they have nishamot, and from time to time they need support, they need help, but I can't be in all the places at the same time. It's complicated. I didn't exactly answer your question. Maybe I answered the question I wanted to answer, but what do you do with people who are tone deaf? I don't know. Maybe it works by contagion. You know that somebody who's not tone deaf, you know, embraces, bring them in. You know, shares with them a moment. You know, that's something that. How would you answer the question?
That's why I asked you. So I'll say one thing to that. When I think about spirituality or holiness as countercultural, I also think about it not only in terms of the culture outside, but also as sort of internal culture.
Yeah.
By which I mean spirituality is about getting out of your own comfort zone.
Yes.
And so I think key categories for the spiritual life are risk, adventure, surprise, the willingness to really step outside of one's internal culture to make that clearing to be open to something else. So I don't know every right answer there.
I tell you something, it's very interesting that you put these words. And I know that you come from a traditional framework. And you left words. I mean, I believe in everything you said, you know, risk and adventure and so on. But you left words that are very important, that you take for granted because you live in a traditional framework. Discipline, precision, persistence. This is the stuff that in my world, in our world of the liberal Jewish community, and I don't like the labels, you know, Orthodox, conservative, or this, that. I mean, you know, but in a less traditional community, this is really where the issue is, where the problem is, because everybody is for adventure and everybody's for risk in this community, and everybody's for love. But when you say, you know, in order to be able to work at yourself and to work at your community, to work at your heart and your neshama, you really need to go for the long, you know, you can't do it in a week or 2 weeks, you know, give it to me in 1 week, give it to me in one pasuk, give it to me, you know, in 1 session, 2 sessions, or 5 sessions. Say, well, you know, you're in here for the long run. This is going to take years and years and years. And there's a discipline and there's a path, you know, and there's precision. And that's another thing that, you know, okay, you know, I do it, but not quite. It should be okay, you know. But the spiritual life, in order to be able to reach for the things we're trying to reach, requires also precision.
This speaks to the point of what's countercultural. So what's countercultural for
In
you
my world.
is normativity, discipline, etc. And in mine is.
I mean, I was
adventure.
using, you know, this metaphor, you know, this sort of the map of the upper world and so on, that we know from the Torah, you know, and even intuitively, you know, we know there's realities that were mapped out in terms of what's holiness, what's a spiritual life, what's a spiritual world, what does it look like? It's mapped out in the Torah and the Talmud and all the sources of our tradition. And there's precision there, you know, and there's structures that you have to enter into and be willing to put yourself in. but you know, it's not convenient, not now, it's not comfortable, now I want to watch TV, laziness, all these things creep in, and then we lose the, you know, we can seize it.
I'll just okay. One last thing. I think it's very interesting that your starting point is that you said you need to change the shape of the heart because it's an unnatural way of being, or that sounds like you're saying the spiritual life is not our inclination.
Correct.
I think it's an interesting starting point, and I don't know that I necessarily agree. And I think that where we begin is a much more traditional. What does that mean? You know, we come from a tradition of believers, and at our core, that's what we are, and everything else gets in the way. So I think that my model is much more of an unpeeling, trying to get back at the core essence, as opposed to reshaping and reorienting. It has a different sort of valence. So it's just interesting.
Thank you. That's very interesting.
So before I hand the mic to the audience, I had a question for the two of you. Erin, you in particular have kind of used holiness and spirituality interchangeably, and really you've started doing that as well in your conversation with Erin, maybe before as well in your presentation. So I'm wondering about that kind of interchangeability, and whether kadoshim to you means you should live a spiritual life, or whether it means something different. Not necessarily they may overlap, but is that the same, or is that different? And I'm thinking that in particular, you know, in terms of Rolly's, you know, last question to you, in a certain sense, each of you was offering a corrective to the world you're coming from, which is quite interesting. But I'm also sensing, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, that separate from that, there's a bit of a different emphasis. That in your presentation, Erin, you were focusing more on kind of being alive to spirituality and to spiritual experiences, and even in your description of the hashpa'ah, spiritual direction that you do, you know, sort of noticing moments of holiness, and if you don't notice them, you know, they might be holy, but you're not noticing that yet. Whereas Rolly's presentation included that, but also was talking about some things which may not necessarily feel or be identified as spiritual, but nevertheless are part of a holy life. So I was just wondering if each of you would comment, you know, just a bit, you know, in relation to this question of, because spirituality is it may not be, you know, it's cultural and also countercultural at the same time. It's kind of a funny thing, but spirituality, people feel, at least people I hang out with, you know, feel pretty comfortable saying that holiness, you know, comes with a big H, and it's a little different. I'm wondering how you see those two things. Are they really the same, or are they taking us in somewhat different directions? So if you would each talk about that briefly, and then we'll turn it on.
Give me a minute.
I think spirituality is, you know, there are a couple of different ways of looking at it, defining it, you know, is living in the presence of God, or living a life from the place of the neshama, living your life from the place of your pnimiyut and your neshama, really. That's what being a spiritual being is, or living a spiritual life is, living in the pnimiyut, not in the chitzoniyut. Seeing yourself as living in the presence of God. So for me, that's a step, that's a medium to achieve a life of holiness. But a life of holiness, I think, is achieved through the exercise of your spirituality, through the practice, through the, I don't know if I'm being clear. It's spirituality is the medium that if you stay in it for the course and you do what you're supposed to do as a spiritual being, then you may achieve moments of holiness, moments of for me, holiness is the kesher, basically, is the bridge, is the connection. So you may attain it if you remain, if you persist, and if you do the work as a spiritual being. For me, the holiness is attained through the change that you experience as you
progress on that path. I think that's it. Maybe.
I've been using them interchangeably because I largely experience them to be interchangeable. I think that spirituality is the pursuit of holiness in the world. It's an attempt to find transcendence within that which is most mundane. Interestingly, I think that holiness, as opposed to language of spirituality, has something of a more locatable, what's the word, quality to it, by which I mean, I think it is, maybe people don't agree with me. It seems to me that one can identify an experience, a moment, a person, an encounter as being holy with a little bit more ease, perhaps, than the abstract spiritual, but that's a half-baked thought. I really need to think about it a little bit more. But I did want to say that I'm indebted to you really because I really appreciated your expansion of the concept of Talmud Torah. I'm going to come back, don't worry, to the way I understood you to be talking about. It was not just about the exercise of text, but the exercise of one's mind or one's faculties to be able to essentially be an interpreter. So that when one goes out in the world, one isn't only studying words on a page, but is studying the world, and it too presents itself as something that requires further and further and further investigation, because what you see is not all that there is.
Right.
And I think that practice is very much related to this. Again, I'm not quite answering the precise difference between holiness and spirituality, but I do think that we're both sort of grasping at these ways of unmasking, of seeing what's behind experience in the world. And when one does have the lens of holiness on, one is inclined to be ever more sensitive to, I hope, to depths of what's beyond that which meets the eye. So I will admit to my own lack of clarity when it comes to holiness specifically. But I hope that we've at least opened a good conversation for what it would look like to pursue that in one's life.
So do we have somebody bringing a mic around?
We have a mic.
I have a mic, yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna have
Yeah,
that one.
So open to you folks.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Rolly, can you expand on one of the first things that you said about changing the shape of the heart? Did you mean it only through prayer that changes the heart,
No,
or
no.
was there more? I'd like to hear more on that.
No, I don't mean just with prayer. Prayer is one of the main ways in which we attempt, because it's called by the rabbis, Avodah Shebalev. The Zohar is called Avodat HaRuach, and in the rabbinic tradition it's called Avodah Shebalev. So I take this to say that prayer is really is working the heart, is to make the heart work, to shift from a selfish, mostly from a selfish thing, to a selfless, from just self-love to love of others, right? So that's prayer. But the change of the heart is also through the practice. If you practice chesed, the more you practice chesed, the more you're likely to get used to being a person of chesed. You may not be naturally a person of chesed. A lot of people are not natural. Some people are naturally people who are naturally chesed people. And there are a lot of people, normally in their normal state, it's not the way they are. It's not the way they operate. And so the practice actually brings you to change. By practicing and practicing and practicing. That's why we call it practice. So the more you practice, the more you change. The more you learn, the more you change. If you allow your learning to connect your mind and your heart, if the learning is only intellectual, academic, or just for the sake of learning intellectually, then it's not enough. It's important that it be intellectual. It's important to have rigor. It's important to have discipline and so on. Because learning is about also finding the truth. Now, if you can find the truth, if you can find truth and connect it to your heart, then, your heart begins to change. How does it change? Very short. Our heart really loves, goes or tends or moves towards what we want, or what we love, not necessarily towards the truth. So what do we have to learn? We have to learn in order to find out what's the truth. So then we can love the truth. We can move ourselves to love the truth, not what we say is the truth. We say, this is the truth, and then we draw the circles around it. And we say, that's the truth. They're like the aim thing, right? We say, this is the truth, but I want what I say is the truth. And then we learn in order to be able to know about the truth, in order to love the truth, so that we can change on the basis of the truth. So it's learning, it's prayer. Basically, al-shoshat dvarim ha'olam omed. So that's what it is. Gemilut Torah, Avodah, and Gemilut Chasadim, basically. The rabbis already gave us the program.
In 3 sessions, we talked about the positive dimension of holiness. Clearly, there's a dark side of holiness we really haven't touched upon. So, a few examples. Steve Blanchard talked about the need to set limits and fences. Well, the Catholic Church is now struggling with that problem that they declared marriage holy state, and therefore, if you're divorced, you can't participate in communion. They're struggling with that issue, and it causes many people tremendous pain. The speaker last week talked about how he felt the holiness of walking on the Temple Mount, and how he experienced a special sense of holiness. Nevertheless, it's the most contested spot on earth. This desire to see that the Temple Mount is holy, leading to a tremendous amount of death and destruction. So how does one, granted that one needs to have limits and one needs to have places that are special, but that sounds good in the abstract. How do you think about it in practice?
Thank you for raising that. It's true. I think that, from our earliest sources, we see that holiness is very, very dangerous business. And you're right to point out that our own lives, our own political realities, it all testifies to that. And hence we set limits. I don't know if Steve Blanchard is still here, right? But the Kodesh Kodashim is a very dangerous place. It's a place of potential connection, and it's a place of death.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Right. So the locus of the greatest intensification of kedusha is precisely the place that really yields the greatest threat to our very existence, which speaks to its power and potential, and yes, all that we need to really be careful about. So what I'm hoping we're presenting is ways to keep in check precisely that. And when holiness gets out of control, there are prices to be paid.
Why get involved with holiness when it causes so much trouble? Now we haven't really taken that argument on. The secular perspective is, well, holiness is just causing death, destruction, pain for people.
Well, it's not just causing that.
No,
It's also causing love, connection, joy. Right. Did you want to? No. Or if there's no question. Sorry.
First, thank you all very much for a very meaningful evening. So please don't take this question in anything less than a generous spirit. But most times this evening I heard the word holy. We could just deleted that word and put it in good life. We could have completed the sentence. In other words, I think we could all agree that culture of greed, individualism, quick fix is bad. Fellowship, chesed, soul, mystery, good. Mm-hmm. Our life is a good, our holy life, our spiritual life is a good life. But I would like to think that by being, committed Jews, we are and being holy or seeking holiness, there's somehow some added value. What value does it add over just having this good life of saying individualism is bad, which most people can, most thinkers would agree with? What more am I having by being here tonight?
I'll be happy to answer. I think we have a role as Jews to lead humanity. That's what I think. I believe that we're not just here a Jewish people that survived all, 3,500 years. just because. And I think we're here, we have a specific mission to humanity. We are here to set the example. We're here to lead humanity. We are the Kohanim, Mamlechet Kohanim. We are here to serve humanity. But the word Kohen means to serve. It doesn't mean to be superior, to be better. It means to serve. We're here to serve humanity by example, to lead humanity, to love, to truth, and to peace. That's what the mission of the Jewish people is. And we've had an influence on humanity, a very big influence on humanity. I don't know that we have, at the current moment, we are living up to our mission in a serious way, for all sorts of reasons, which I'm not going to enter into now. But being Jewish, in my view, means to live this type of life, to live Torah and mitzvot, not because the whole world has to live Torah and mitzvot, because this is only for us, but as a way to show that it's possible to achieve lives of Kedusha and to achieve a connection with Kadosh Baruch Hu that is not just for us. Everybody in the world can achieve a connection with Kadosh Baruch Hu. But we have to show the way how to achieve that. And we have because we have inherited this tradition, because we had Torah, and we have Torah, we have a path that is charted for us. The rest of humanity, I'm not sure they have a path that is charted or clear for them. And we have it. And I think that that's what it means to be Jewish, and that's why we're discussing this here. Not just for us. We shouldn't discuss this for ourselves as individuals or communities or for the Jewish people. We have to see this as our impacting the future of humanity.
I'll just respond briefly. I think that your focus is more on what makes this Jewish holiness, perhaps. And I just wanted to respond that this was the opening charge that was identified by Deborah at the very opening session. How do we distinguish holiness from the ethical, the beautiful, right, the good? So we may or may not have gotten there. We're all trying hard to find our way. But I would just add in, and again, I think that we're acting as correctives for where we're coming from, that all of those words don't actually address the realm of, we call it sort of the contemplative tradition or the more mystical attempts to unite with something that we call God, mystery, divinity, etc. And that's, I think, an area that isn't quite included in all those other categories. So I think you've identified something very real, and that is that we all can be, I hope, very good people, even without accessing something otherworldly. But I think holiness actually asks us to tap into something even beyond that. I hope it leads us back to those places that are ethical, good, and beautiful, but I don't think it captures the entirety of the concept.
So thank you for all that you've said so far. One thing I often think about is sort of the holiness in the mundane and in sort of the Gashmi. Like sometimes when I'm preparing for Shabbat, I'm doing the most mundane, almost like consumerist actions, like going, grabbing the food in the supermarket, like the things that we was referring to as like not necessarily holy, but they're in service of Shabbat, and that's something like once in a blue moon, I'll like remember to draw attention to the holiness of preparing for Shabbat, that act. So I'm curious, like, what your thoughts are on not necessarily the holiness, because it may not be the right term for it, but the value or the goodness of acts that are often not holy, that are the opposite of what we're talking about. So the daily structures and making money and buying the food and doing the things that we need to do to create the spaces and the structures for the holy, can you consider those actions also holy, or are they something else, but also good? Like, how do you frame those?
So last week, Ariel Evan Mays talked a bunch about that, specifically the area of hachana, or preparation. He spoke about the ways in which the Hasidic masters really valued that more even than the mitzvah act itself. And he pointed to a text that highlighted the ways in which the entire week could be seen as pre and post Shabbat. So all of your existence is really just one big, involvement with Shabbat itself, which is just another way of saying precisely what you're saying, which is buying the bread and standing in line at kosher marketplace, 3 o'clock on Friday afternoon. It's hard to see the holiness there, but if you can frame your mind in such a way, then yes, you can see it as such. But hachana, which means preparation, means work, as Rolly's been saying a bunch, and it's not always obvious. I know that better, as much as you do. And yet the cultivation of holiness, the cultivation of spirituality asks us to, at those moments, prepare our minds and hearts and open our hearts to see that. It's not an easy task, and I think most of us probably fail a lot of the time. But the hope is that if you've had your 3 days post and you've had your 3 days after, that by the time you stand online next, you too might find the blessing in the chicken soup or whatever.
I agree. I think that it's the mindset that you are in when you stand in line in the supermarket, or people are pushing and they're trying to get, if you go to Machne Yehuda, that's what you experience of running. Right? So the question is, what is in your mind when you're doing this? What's in your mind and what's in your heart? So suppose, I'll give you an example. Suppose that you have a friend who has a birthday next week. And tomorrow you say, I'm going to prepare and I'm going to buy a gift for my friend. And you go to a store and you find the pen that you want to buy for your friend. You look for it. You have your friend in mind all the time. What will my friend like? I know that my friend will like something special. You find all of a sudden, you say, wow, this beautiful pen, perfect for my friend. You buy the pen, you pay, you're all the time thinking about how happy your friend is going to be when you give him the pen. And then you ask the person who sold you the pen to wrap it as a gift, and you see how the person is wrapping it as for a gift, and you're thinking, my friend is going to be so happy. And then you pay, you're happy to pay, to put the money on the counter for the sake of your friend, right? And then you give it to your friend, and your friend is full of joy and hugs you and says, I've been waiting for a pen like this all these years. I love it. How did you know? And you spend all this time, right, buying the pen, thinking about your friend, rejoicing, and so on. Well, the same is true about Shabbat, basically. If you go and you say, why do I have to go to the market and carry the bags and push through the people and spend all this money for all this special food and in top buy flowers and good wine? But if you're thinking all the time while you're doing these things, the same as with the pen for your friend, if you're thinking, this is going to be such a beautiful Shabbat. I'm buying all this stuff to be with my friends. I don't know if you're married. Are you married? Okay. To be with my friends, to have a special moment. We're going to have such a connection. We're going to sing Nigunim. It's going to be so high. We're going to connect. We're going to feel God's presence. Then it's a different story. That's the way.
Rolly, this is basically toward you, because I'm aware over the years of your having seemingly made a transition from being essentially a social activist to now being a precision mitzvah-focused mystic.
Well,
I don't mean to out you, but I'm older than everybody in the room, so I've seen it.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, but the question that I have for you is it seems to me that likely that the framework that you started with in your rabbinate under Marshall was more a sense that the mitzvot were a matter of autonomy, that how people come and it seems very likely that your position right now has brought you into a sense of the power of heteronomy in the traditional sense, that surrender to the other is essential in terms of bittul to the other, nullification toward the source of the mitzvot is essential in terms of making the connection to holiness.
Yes.
So I just want to ask you to speak for a moment, if you'd be so kind, as to whether this shift of frameworks, where does that put you in regard to your olam, in regard to your community? And communication.
Thank you. So I don't want to speak about myself for too long, but it's true that I made a shift. But just a corrective. When my teacher Marshall, alav shalom, embraced social activism, he did it from a place of chiyuv, from a sense of commandedness with regard to what we need to do for the other. And this came from Heschel. And it's true that I've made a shift and I've made a voyage over the last 30 years plus. It's true, but it was never as a sense of autonomy. I'll do whatever I want. I'll choose whatever I want. I mean, there was a frame, and for me, things have shifted over the years, and that's part of my own spiritual development, and my own learning and my own growth. And it's not that everything has changed; it's that things have acquired a different perspective, different importance. Now I see things that I didn't see before. And while I'm still committed to social activism in a serious way, its relationship to some of the other things, in the field of my spiritual life, its importance or its place, its place has not its importance, but its place has shifted. There was much more. It took more of my concern, and now there are other things that absorb my concern as well.
So thinking about holy moments, it's like you have to do a kind of connect the dots, because holy moments are so hard to capture and retain. It's like they're there, they're powerful, and then they vanish, and you don't know where they went. Has there been in each of your experience a particular holy moment that has been sustaining, that has sort of changed your course a little bit?
That's a great question. Really beautiful. Thank you for that. So the first thing that comes to mind for me is the birth of my children. That has changed my life in every way. And just a testimony to miracle day in and day out. So there's no question in my mind that awareness has dramatically altered my spiritual being.
For me, it's also been moments of on the border between life and death, and I mean, as you know, I often officiate at funerals, and I don't mean to be morbid. But some of those moments are very, very powerful. They're an encounter with the meaning of life, with the essence of life, and the way that people live their lives, in the eulogies, in the moment of seeing what the absence of a person means, So, one never thinks, that funerals may be inspirational, but often I found that some of those moments are the carriers of profound holiness, and also upon seeing how people orient themselves towards the mourners, in many occasions, in order to support them and so on. So there have been moments filled with profound meaning and holiness. I can talk about many other things, but this is what's in my mind now.
Thank you so much, Erin and Rolly. You've given us a tremendous amount to think about. And my wish is that this Friday afternoon at 2:30, you'll be in Fairway, you'll be in the marketplace, and we'll all transform our mundane experiences. And really, thank you for sharing your insights and thoughts with us.
Thank you.